"You're coming with me," said the gentle rancher to the mother punished for birthing a daughter. The wind that morning carried the scent of rain and dust, a mingling of promise and sorrow that clung to the earth like a whispered prayer. Out beyond the low stone ridge, the land opened wide, brown grasses swaying under a pale, untroubled sky, the kind of place where secrets could travel miles without ever finding an ear. She walked along the wagon ruts barefoot, the hem of her faded calico dress stained dark from mud and birth. Her arms were wrapped around the smallest bundle she had, the one swaddled in a scrap of an old flour sack. The other two, slender, hollow-eyed girls, walked just behind, holding on to what little courage their small hands could grasp. Their cheeks were blotched from crying, but they didn't speak. Children know when words are heavier than silence. Behind them, the small farmhouse they had called home was already shrinking into the horizon, and with it, the man who had sent them out. He'd spoken his sentence in a voice that was more like a door slamming shut than any human sound. 3 girls, he had said, as though naming a curse. Then the blows had come, quick and cold, until her head rang, and the baby's cry turned thin and frightened. There had been no goodbye, only a hand shoving her into the yard. She hadn't looked back. Some part of her understood there was nothing left to see. By mid-morning, the road bent toward a cluster of cottonwoods. The shade was a mercy, the sound of leaves whispering overhead a comfort she hadn't expected to feel again. She sat at the roots, pressing her back against the rough bark. The girls gathered close, their small bodies trembling against her. Her mind kept circling the same question, where can I take them? But the world felt wide and empty, and she was nothing but a woman with 3 daughters and no name that mattered. The sound of hooves reached her before she saw him. Steady, unhurried, as if whoever rode them had nowhere particular to be. When he came into view, he was a tall figure on a sorrel mare, hat pulled low against the noon glare. The lines in his face seemed carved by years of sun and silence. His coat was worn at the cuffs, his gloves darkened from use. He reined in a short distance away, not crowding her, not demanding her name. Just looking, eyes the gray of river stones taking in the children, the baby, the bruises. He spoke in a voice that carried no judgment, only quiet certainty. "You're coming with me." For a moment, she felt the old reflex to resist, because no man had ever spoken those words without meaning possession. But there was something different here, something that made her hold his gaze. He didn't reach for her. He didn't step closer. He only waited, as though the choice was hers alone to make. The older girls looked up at her, eyes searching. Trust was not something they had been taught to give easily, yet even they seemed to feel the weight of the moment. She rose slowly, clutching the baby, and nodded once. He dismounted and walked to the wagon hitch nearby, its boards worn but clean. Without a word, he lifted the older girls onto the bench, then helped her climb in. The baby stirred, whimpering against her chest. He handed her a folded blanket that smelled faintly of wood smoke and pine. They rode in silence, the road unfurling ahead like a ribbon through the grasslands. Every so often, he glanced over, as if measuring the distance between what she had endured and what lay before her. By the time the sky began to bruise with the coming dusk, they reached his land. The house was small, but it stood steady on its foundation, its porch swept clean. Beyond it, a barn leaned slightly under its own age, and a handful of cattle grazed in the far pasture. It was not much by the world's standards, but to her it looked like a place where nothing had to be earned with blood or fear. He helped the girls down first, then her, his hands never lingering. He opened the door, and the warm scent of stew met them, thick with carrots and sage. Inside, the light from the oil lamp softened the sharp edges of the day. She stood in the doorway, unsure whether to step in. He looked at her then, not at the bruises or the tired slump of her shoulders, but straight into the part of her that still believed in shelter. "You're safe here," he said, and for the first time in a long while, she almost believed it. Under the pale wash of dawn, the rancher's land breathed a silence that felt both heavy and promising. Samuel Hayes moved through it like a man who knew the weight of solitude, his boots pressing into frosted grass, his breath steaming in the chill. The night before had been restless. The girl's face had haunted him, pale, bruised, eyes too old for her youth. He had seen women endure hardship before, but something in her gaze, it clung like the scent of rain before a storm. Clara sat by the hearth in the small guest room he had given her hands cupped around a tin mug, though she barely drank. The newborn lay in a basket Samuel's late wife had once lined with patchwork cloth. The twins, no more than 5, sat cross-legged on the floor, their hair loose and tangled, watching the fire as if it could explain the world to them. She didn't look up when he entered. He spoke in the low, steady tone he reserved for colts and lost souls. "You'll stay here until you're steady on your feet." Her mouth trembled, not with gratitude, but with the hesitance of someone who had learned not to trust charity. The silence between them was taut, the kind that could snap into argument or soften into understanding, depending on the next breath. Days passed, each one folding into the next like worn pages in journal. Samuel worked the land, repairing a fence line or checking cattle, while Clara moved through the house quietly, as if her footsteps might shatter something fragile. She mended shirts, swept floors, and kept the girls close, always watching the horizon, as if expecting trouble to come riding in. It did. One cold afternoon, Samuel spotted dust on the road, a single rider approaching. He leaned against the porch rail, hand brushing the worn stock of his rifle. The man was young, his eyes slick with a kind of charm that had no depth. He dismounted with the air of someone who believed the world owed him, and Samuel didn't have to ask to know who he was. Clara appeared in the doorway, her knuckles white around the wood. "Didn't think you'd run far," the man said, stepping closer. Samuel's voice was calm, but his stance was unyielding. "She's not yours to claim." The man's smile was thin. "She's my wife, and them's my girls." Clara's voice cut through the cold air, brittle but sure. "Not anymore." Samuel stepped forward, and the air between the men grew thick with a quiet, dangerous tension. Words passed low and sharp, the kind that didn't need to be shouted to carry threat. When the man finally left, Samuel knew it was not over. That night, Clara sat by the window, her profile lit by lamplight. "You shouldn't have stood up for me," she murmured. "He won't forget it." Samuel's answer was plain, but weighted. "Neither will I." The days that followed were different. Clara moved with more care, her eyes scanning the distance before she stepped outside. Samuel kept the rifle closer. And yet in the quiet moments, when she helped him carry in firewood, or when he showed the twins how to feed the hens, something unspoken began to root between them. It was not romance, not yet. It was trust, growing slow like winter wheat under snow. One evening, as the wind rattled the shutters, the sound of hooves broke the stillness. This time, more than one rider. Samuel felt the shift in the air, the way the land itself seemed to hold its breath. Clara gathered the girls, her face pale but resolute. Samuel stepped onto the porch, his coat pulled tight, rifle in hand. The riders slowed, their silhouettes sharp against the dimming sky. The man from before was there, but he had company now. 3 others, their eyes cold and assessing. "We'll take her," the man said. "And the girls." Samuel's grip tightened. "Not tonight. Not ever." The wind carried the smell of wood smoke and snow, and the moment hung, heavy, fragile, ready to break. Clara stood behind him in the doorway, her children clinging to her skirt, her breath shallow. She had run for so long, always alone. Now someone stood between her and the dark. The leader's lip curled. "You'll regret this, Hayes." "Maybe," Samuel said, "but not today." The riders turned, slow and deliberate, the echo of their hooves fading into the night. Inside, Clara's shoulders shook, though her eyes stayed dry. Samuel poured her tea, not asking for thanks. She took it, her fingers brushing his for the briefest second, and something passed between them, not a promise, but the beginning of one. Outside, the land lay in silence again. But Samuel knew the quiet would not last. And somewhere in Clara's gaze, for the first time in a long while, there was not just fear, but the faintest flicker of home. Don't miss more heartfelt Wild West tales. Hit subscribe and join the ride.